Danger Along the Ohio, Chapter 14. Caught between their captors and the unknown attackers, the three of them were helpless. The flaming branches must have burned out because Amos couldn't see anything now except lightning flashes of guns. The noise was deafening. He clapped his hands over his ears and burrowed into the leaves. When Jonathan started to lift his head, Amos pulled him back to the ground. "Stay down, we're in the crossfire." Abruptly, the gunshots ceased and a strange voice called out, "Don't let him get away!" The sounds of English words ringing through the night made Amos catch his breath. He raised up on his hands and knees and shouted at the attackers, "Don't shoot! We're not Indians! We're—" All of a sudden, it seemed that dozens of guns were turned on Amos alone. Bullets buzzed around him like angry bees, slicing through the leaves, chipping bark into his face. He threw himself back on the ground. The attackers must have thought his call was an Indian trick. Just then, off to his left, he heard a man shouting, urging his men forward. "Get 'em all, boys! We don't want any of 'em coming back to Kaintuck." Amos guessed they were the same men who had attacked the old man's hunting parties south of Ohio. They must have trailed the Indians back into the Ohio country, bent on destroying them. There was no hope of rescue from such men. The three of them lay there in their sheltered spot, their faces buried in the leaves, hearts pounding, throats dry with fear. As the furious conflict went on, Amos realized the Indians were too busy fighting for their lives to worry about their prisoners. It might be possible for them to slip away unnoticed. He reached out and clasped Clara's arm. "This is our chance to escape. They'll never see us in the dark." "But they're all around us." "Never mind," he whispered, knowing that with Clara weak, he must be the leader now. "Just follow me. Go slow and keep your heads down," he told them. Then, stomach to the earth, he crawled out from between the two trees, his hands clawing at the moldy leaves. Feeling his way through the murky woods, he hurried from one shadowy spot to another, like a mole shunning the light. Once they passed within a few feet of a flaming gun, but whether it belonged to a white man or an Indian didn't matter. Either one could mistake them for the enemy. Amos's fear grew as he began to discern shapes around him, tree trunks and ferns and fallen logs. Dawn was not far off. They must find a hiding place before the light came. He scurried on, pausing at the last in a thicket of young saplings, some so close he could scarcely pass between them. Clara and Jonathan crept in beside him. Amos ducked when he heard a bullet thud into a nearby tree. "Keep down and dig under the leaves and hide," he whispered. "The sun will be up soon." Minutes passed that seemed like hours, and at last Amos raised his head out of his leafy cave. He could distinguish the clear outline of a rock, then the pale gold of Clara's hair among the leaves. Smoke, a bluish haze against the green foliage, burned his nose and throat. He held his breath and listened. The gunshots were not as sharp and close as before. In fact, no sound came from their right, only from the left, and it was moving away. The battle seemed to have passed them by. Amos brushed aside the damp leaves and scrambled to the edge of the thicket. They hadn't traveled far in the darkness because he spied the charred remnants of last night's campfire. There were no dead bodies, no injured in sight to remind them of the fierce fight that had taken place there. Clara and Jonathan came up beside him. "Everyone's gone." Clara's breathless words were both a question and a statement. "Yes, but I can still hear them," Amos said, pointing in the direction of the muted sound. "What do we do now?" Jonathan asked, his teeth chattering together. He clamped his jaws tight and lifted Clara's knapsack onto his shoulder. "We get away from here as fast as we can," Amos said, already turning his back on the fading battle. He knew they must put distance between themselves and the warring parties. He led the way at a fast pace until he realized that Clara didn't have the strength to keep up. Motioning Jonathan ahead, he went back to help her. She leaned on him, out of breath and unsteady on her feet. "Do you think they'll come after us?" she asked him. "The Indians are the only ones who know about us, and they're too busy right now. We've got to hurry and find the Ohio River." "But how?" Clara said. "We don't even know what direction we're traveling." "I'm sure the river is still south of us," Amos said. "Once we get a fix on the sun, we can figure out where to go. But first, we get away from here." After walking for some time, they came to a shallow stream almost hidden by brush, but wide enough to let in the sun. The sky was a vibrant blue. Even before getting a drink, Amos picked up a stick, about as big around as his thumb and pushed it into the ground. As the sun moved westward, the stick's shadow would fall eastward. Then, when he would point his right arm to the west and his left arm to the east, he'd be facing south. By the time Clara was rested enough to continue, Amos had his bearings. They struck out south, their spirits lifting with their newfound freedom and the knowledge that they were once more headed for Marietta. Amos worried they might veer off course under the forest's canopy, so at the top of the hill he sent Jonathan up a tree to look for the river. Swaying among the flimsy top branches, Jonathan gave a yelp. "I see it! I see the Ohio! It's that way!" He pointed an arm to indicate the route they should take. Amos helped Clara up. As they proceeded, they seemed to lean more heavily on him. After a while, he called a halt and told Jonathan to get the chunk of cooked venison out of the knapsack. It was cold and dry and a meager amount for 3 people, but it would give them some strength. Amos looked down their back trail, wondering who had won the running battle between the Indians and the white men. For a moment, he thought of Red Moccasin. The Indian wasn't their concern anymore, but despite all that had happened, Amos was still glad that he had pulled Red Moccasin out of the river. He hoped the boy had gotten away from the night attackers. "How far are we from Marietta?" Jonathan asked. "I don't know," Amos said, "but it can't be far, if the boatmen were right about the distances." "Amos, we've got to find Queen Anne," Clara said. "I can't bear to think of her all alone in this wilderness." "We need to get on to Marietta, Clara. Every minute we spend in these woods, we're in danger. Besides, we could search for weeks and not find her." "But she must be back where we left her. She was at the bottom of a hill the last time we saw her." Amos met Clara's worried gaze and shook his head. "We don't know where that is. We've got to go on to Marietta as fast as we can. Then someone there can come back and look for her. I'll come myself," he finished. Clara hung her head. Her body shook, and Amos knew she was crying. But he wouldn't give in. He couldn't. They were free, and they had to get out of these woods before they were captured again. Jonathan came and sat down beside Clara. "Don't cry, sister. She'll get by until we find her." Amos leaned down and laid his hand on her gold-crowned head. "Clara, it's only been a day. She's all right, and the sooner we get to Marietta, the sooner someone can come back for her." Clara raised her head. She swiped at the tears running down her cheeks. "You're right, Amos, but I just hate to think—" She stopped, and her gaze flew past Amos and fastened on something behind him. Watching her eyes widen, Amos felt a prickly chill crawl up his back. He sucked in a ragged breath and whirled around. There, among the trees, stood Red Moccasin. Leaning to take the weight off his injured leg, Red Moccasin gazed at them, his eyes glittering with a cold, determined light. Then he stepped forward and began to speak. When he paused and pointed off through the woods, Clara scrambled to her feet. "Be careful, Amos. He's got a gun." Amos barely took notice of her warning. The knowledge that Red Moccasin had survived the raid made everything else seem unimportant. After a few seconds, though, he began to wonder at the boy's presence. He wasn't surprised Red Moccasin could follow their trail because they hadn't tried to hide it, but why had he come after them? Returning the Indian's gaze with as much calmness as he could muster, Amos asked, "What do you want?" Red Moccasin spoke again, but this time shifted the gun into both hands. With deliberate care, he brought the barrel around until it pointed at Amos's chest. Amos couldn't help but fall back a step. He didn't understand the Shawnee's words, but the boy's move was unmistakable. Red Moccasin was threatening them, and the threat could mean only one thing. He was bent on taking them back to his village at the point of a gun if necessary. Staring at the gun barrel's round black mouth, Amos felt a painful flutter in his stomach, and he clamped his jaws so hard that his teeth ached. Had Simon felt this kind of fear when he faced Amos's pistol? Not likely. Their confrontation had been pretend, a game between friends, but this was no game. Red Moccasin was deadly serious. In the tense silence, fear swept Amos's mind clean, and resistance rose to take its place. After all they had done for Red Moccasin, how could he threaten them with a gun? If they refused to go with him, what would he do? Shoot them? "What do you want?" Amos asked again, stalling for time. Somehow there had to be a way to make Red Moccasin go away and leave them alone. As the Indian boy again pointed through the woods, Amos took a step toward him, hand outstretched. "We can't go with you, Red Moccasin. We belong with our father, and you belong with your grandfather." Amos paused, then asked, "Where is your grandfather?" A clear image of the old man edged into Amos's mind. Suddenly, the Indian's counsel made sense to him. A person couldn't run away from his own history, but he could walk away, let go of the memory that haunted him. The old man had given him hope. Walk away. Maybe, Amos thought, I've already taken the first step. "Where is your grandfather?" he repeated. "I'd like to thank him for—" He stopped when Red Moccasin's expression changed. A shadow seemed to cross the Indian's face like a cloud across the sun. Then his hand sliced through the air as if to slap away Amos's question. Amos's breath caught in his throat. He had his answer. The boy's grandfather had died in the fighting. "I'm sorry," Amos murmured. Though the boy couldn't understand the words, surely he could sense Amos's regret. With the old man gone, Red Moccasin was truly the last of his family. Amos reached out a hand to the boy who was, despite the gun, still more friend than enemy. But just as he took a step forward, the sound of a man's voice brought him to a halt. "Hold on there, boy. Just stand real still until we sort this out." As if in a dream, Amos turned his head and stared in the direction of a strange voice. A white man stood partially concealed behind a tree, his long-barreled rifle leveled at Red Moccasin. While Clara and Jonathan stood staring at the man, too stunned to speak, Amos expelled a noisy breath. His first jubilant thought was the man's presence meant freedom, safety, deliverance. But as he looked closer at the stranger, his joy began to melt. There was no sign of friendliness in the lean face, and the man's curt command ordering him to stand still sounded almost like a threat. Just as Amos took a cautious step toward Clara and Jonathan, he heard the click of the rifle's hammer being cocked into firing position. He spun toward Red Moccasin. The Indian boy's weapon was just coming steady on the half-hidden stranger. In the time it took to catch his breath, Amos figured out the dangerous conflict. Red Moccasin didn't want to give up his claim to the three of them, but the white man seemed determined to stop the Indian from doing anything. Maybe the man even meant to take Red Moccasin prisoner. Amos was sure that with a loaded gun in his hands, the boy would resist. Somehow, Amos knew it was up to him to end the standoff. Be careful, he warned himself. Guns kill no matter who holds them. With shaking knees and a hammering heart, he stepped forward until he stood between the two readied rifles. Ooh.